Well, thank you both for agreeing to join us again today. I'll just give a quick introduction. So Jay Connor was a co-founder and CEO of Learning Ovations together with his wife, Carol, until the company was sold to Scholastic in 2022. The Featured Product Assessment to Instruction, or A2i, supports K-3 teachers and administrators in achieving third grade reading outcomes for all children. A2i is often cited as a success story for scaling evidence-based products, first through Learning Ovations and then through the transfers to Scholastic. We also have Sarah Siegal. Sarah is the Director of Research and Practice at Scholastic and brings a unique perspective from having played a key role both in the design and development of A2i at Learning Ovations and then transitioning to Scholastic when the platform was sold. So Sarah can tell us about both sides of this transition. I'm going to start by asking Jay if you could tell us the story of how A2i moved from research to market and how bringing this innovation to scale was considered in each step of the process.
Super, Rebecca. I think the best place to start is just a little bit of context. And that's about, A2i is really focused in terms of getting all children reading at grade level by the end of third grade. That has been a problem, a national problem, and from our experience, an international problem for 30 to 40 years. And the main difficulty, if you will, in terms of getting a solid solution to teaching reading is that there's really been warring factions, if you will, in terms of phonics is most important, whole language is most important. And so even back in the late 90s, there was what was called the reading wars. And there were camps that, talked about whole language, other camps that just talked about phonics was the most important. And that's been going on. And most recently, it's been embedded in what's called the science of reading. Mm-hmm. And there's still confusion between phonics and whole language. And what A2i does is it looks at that landscape and says, well, wait a second, it's not either or, it's what the child needs. And so I'll go back then to explain, given that context, where A2i and where Carol's work started. So I mentioned the reading wars back in the late 90s. Is in response to the reading wars, the Department of Education supported what's called the National Reading Panel. And the National Reading Panel got experts internationally in terms of what does it take to support children reading at grade level. And again, the focus was how do you support children, not the child focus necessarily, but really at the adult support level. And there were really three things that came out from that. There's really an understanding that each child brings a different set of skills to the classroom. And so you have to individualize depending on what those skills are. Some children walk into the classroom knowing phonics, knowing how to decode. Other children really haven't even seen letters yet. So it really is understanding that you have to meet the child where they are. The next thing is that to teach reading, you have to have a really systemic and explicit way of doing that. You need to have, treating or supporting kids in their learning, and then giving kids the chance to practice that. Practice it among themselves, practice it at home. So it's this kind of iterative process, very systemic, making sure that there's enough phonics so that they can advance to reading, making sure that they advance to more critical reading, they have larger vocabulary supports in that. So it's really systemic. And the last of the three elements from the National Reading Panel was something that really focused in on how best to do it in these large classrooms, 20, 30 kids within a classroom. And it was really found for children to read exceptionally, you need to do it in small groups, especially phonics instruction in small groups. And so Carol, whose research was already working on that, she was already beginning to understand the strength and the power of individualization, of explicit instruction, and of small group instruction. In matter of fact, some of her early research showed that small group instruction was 4 times more effective than large groups. But she asked the large question. She asked the question, and that was, well, this is tough stuff. There's a lot of moving parts. To try to individualize for 30 kids in a classroom, how do you do it? So from her very beginning of her research agenda, she started looking at it. How do we make this practical for teachers? So she started her research agenda with the customer in mind, if you will, the user, the practice person. And so her research was been marked by the fact that she always saw the teacher as a co-designer in her work. How do we make this easier for the teacher to administer? How do we make it easier for the students to participate? And as iterations went forward, several grants from the U.S. Department of Education, from NIH. She won the President's Award for Early Research Scientists. It was really a focus in terms of what are the things that you need to do to make those three elements from the National Reading Panel possible for teachers to establish within their classroom practice. And so first it started with understanding what it is that a very individual child needs to get to results. And so there was a lot of just classroom observation. Kids present what set of skills, what are the kind of trainings that those kids receive versus kids achieving other sets of skills. And she found in this progress that actually there is a specific amount of instruction that helps, and another type of amount of instruction that if somebody knows phonics and you teach them more phonics, their reading can actually degrade. So it really became you had to be precise, which again reflected back to the national panel. And so through iterations of research projects, randomized controlled trials in various schools, she was improving the software that was going to support teachers in doing that. And she was improving the recommendations in terms of groups of kids. She was improving how do you connect this to the curriculum that they have in the classroom. So over 7 randomized controlled trials, ultimately the last trial being a trial from first grade to third grade that demonstrated that children receiving A2i 3 years in a row, irrespective of how they entered that first grade classroom, 94% of them can be on grade level or above by the end of third grade. So that's what the Department of Education just put their radar up and said, oh my God, this is really something we need to support in terms of how to get to scale, how to get to other schools. So that really is the story of how Carol's research very much focused on teacher practice, very much focused on proving what it took for children to become successful through 7 randomized controlled trials with an effect level of 0.76. And for those non-geeks out there, that's pretty powerful effects. That's population level effects.
Wow, that's very powerful. And thank you for placing that development in the context of the reading wars. And then now we have the science of reading wars. And so that's still going on with us today. I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about how Carol involved teachers in that early design stage. So was it mainly through classroom observations and interviews, or did they have any sort of other ways of participating in the design process?
Yeah. One of the things, and I think Sarah can, verify this as well, is Carol, her marching orders to her research teams was always embrace the teacher. Don't just have the teacher as this kind of passive, partner. Really have them understand why we're there, what's the importance of the research, and what is the benefits that we've learned. And so that approach started all the way back at the classroom observation level, that when they were going to go into a classroom, the teacher really knew why they were there, really knew what they were trying to do, and then were debriefed, after that. And then when we moved to begin to test the various kinds of algorithms that Carol set up in terms of amount and type of instruction for the children, each of the teachers, and then we've moved up to the administrators. So not only the classroom teacher, but also the administrators of the school understood the research practice that we were building on and how they were participating in that. And many of the teachers helped to develop some of the tools. They helped think through, how do you connect this type of curriculum to the kind of work that I'm doing in their classroom? All of her leadership group, from postdocs to administrators, were teachers that were familiar with the classroom and the ups and the downs and the nuances within the classroom. So I think she fully understood that this was only going to be meaningful if it had that stamp of good practice coming from teachers having been heavily involved throughout.
Right. Thank you. Sarah, let me turn to you and ask, can you tell us how you got involved with Learning Ovations and what role you played in the development of this assessment system?
Sure. So my part of the story starts when I started grad school at the Florida Center for Reading Research and working, as Jay said, as one of Carol's doc students. And this was really in the middle of that first phase of research. So we were doing a ton of classroom observations, what we called video coding, really tracking every single move that actually 12 students at a time made in a classroom. And what I learned as I was kind of getting more familiar with the research process was what we were really doing is validating those algorithms to see that if teachers knew the types and amounts of instruction students should be receiving, what's actually happening in the classroom. And not only that, but what are those student outcomes at the end of the year? And what we discovered through that research was the closer teachers get to the A2i algorithm minutes, the better student outcomes were. So I really got involved kind of in the true classic research sense at that point. And then Carol really started to focus not just on validating the algorithms, but on making sure the content was usable and functional and useful for teachers. So kind of the technology development side. And so I took place kind of, again, in the research sense for most of that work. But right when I graduated with my doctorate, Learning Ovations got the EIR grant. And so it really allowed me, the timing could not have worked out better, to transition from being really familiar with A2i as it was developed to now scaling up all of those features and supports that we had put into A2i in the research community, but now at scale for schools.
Great. Can you, Sarah, can I ask you to go back and just say what you mean by that, the A2i algorithm? What is that? What information is that giving you?
Sure. So A2i has actually patented algorithms that serve each grade specifically, and they're essentially equations that are specific to meet the needs of students, not only in that specific grade, but by the month of the school year that will benefit them most. So we use assessments to get a student's skill profile, ideally at least 3 times a year. Usually we assess about every 6 to 8 weeks to make sure everything's up to date. And then those values tell us the student's decoding, comprehension, and vocabulary levels. And with that profile, we're able to plug the values into the algorithms and spit out minute recommendations. So that's where we get those types of instruction. But again, it's kind of the unique combination of how the scores are valued, what different values are used also to calculate the minutes for those different areas. So for code-focused instruction, certain information is really critical in first grade, but it might look totally different for what you would know about a second grader and what they need. And especially as the year goes on, we see big changes in how much work students can do independently and where they should be focused their time if they're reading below, on, or above grade level. So the algorithms kind of take all that guesswork out for teachers and allow us to then turn it into just clear recommendations.
I see. Thank you. And can I ask either of you how A2i integrates with whatever reading program the school has in place, and whether that's an important feature?
I'll let Sarah answer in general because she was in charge with what we called indexing, which was to take whatever curriculum the school had and index it to the recommendations from A2i. So we were able to meet the teachers where they were. That wasn't where we started, but it was something along the way as we were working with teachers that we understood was critical. But Sarah, I'll let you go into the detail in terms of how indexing happens, and you might even talk about how Watson failed to accomplish what you were able to do.
Sure. So one of the things I kind of alluded to previously is that we really started taking feedback from teachers once we knew that algorithms would help. And one of the first requests we got in that collaboration was to start aligning the recommendations with the materials teachers were using. So it is definitely a critical part of what A2i does. And what we wanted to do for teachers is provide student groupings, which A2i does, and then link those directly with these individual activities they had that would help them meet those minute recommendations. So we did that by essentially tagging each activity in a curriculum with a grade equivalency level. So we could kind of approximate the score or the time of year when that instruction would be delivered, and then also tag it with our activity recommendation groups. So something would be teacher or child managed, something would be meaning or code focused. And that allowed our recommendation engine to start matching up, okay, you need code focused instruction and here are some code focused activities. So starting to make those connections in the technology. We've historically been curriculum agnostic. So because those dimensions match any English language arts curriculum and activity, Anything can kind of be grouped. And then we're also able to estimate using the curriculum or the activity, the duration or the amount of time it will take. And that's kind of the last piece that then we can say, hey, here's a 20-minute activity and your students need 20 minutes of time in this area. And again, then start matching that up using the technology.
Wow. That's really interesting that you made that adaptation to the product based on what you were hearing from teachers was important to them. Were there any other really important inflection points in the product development that you made in response to what you were hearing from teachers or from other stakeholders in the school districts?
Oh, I think it was just a series of changes. And I think another one that even predated the curriculum was about the assessments. Is that originally we were using, Woodcock Johnson or Gates McGinnity, real paper and pencil type of assessments. And we understood in a classroom, especially if we wanted to get every 6 week kind of updates, that was just not impractical to do. It was really a burden on teachers have graduate students come into their classroom to implement these, larger scale assessment protocols. Imagine if we asked each teacher themselves to do it if we were trying to get to scale. So we knew we had to automate and bring technology where now for the first time, not only were we making a teacher support technology, but we're now opening it up to be available to students, because then students could sign in, they could take their assessment, and that would then feed the teachers' recommendation algorithms that Sarah was talking about. So that was a very critical change just in terms of how we even thought about what the product was. And then as we moved down the scale, then there was the curriculum change that we had to say, how do we adapt to teachers in that curriculum? Then there was the change in terms of what if teachers aren't already proficient with small group instruction? How do we support teachers in the field in a very real way to actually organize their classroom in a different way than they had historically been done? And that, again, we wanted to go back and rely as much as possible on changing the technology to be able to meet teachers with those increased needs. We didn't want to just put a huge, brick on every teacher's table and say, good luck. We needed to have this as something that was very responsive and that we tried to anticipate through our, conversations and work with teachers where were going to be the stumbling points. And, other interventions were, kind of online resources that we would make available, or even the kind of hovering capabilities that we've talked about, where you could hover over a question and then we would respond back to the teacher in real time. So they could do this work, whether it was there in the classroom or many teachers prepared their weekly lesson plan, the Sunday before. We needed to have everything there that Sunday afternoon online if the teachers ran into a question or ran into a concern, so that they weren't held up.
So clearly, being responsive to teachers and their needs and their work environments was a really critical part of your design process. Who are the decision makers for A2i? Who did you have to make happy in order to get this product adopted?
Very good question. And that really is when the Learning Ovations and I started participating in how do we bring this to market. Because Carol's original focus, as we've talked about, was really laser-like in terms of how do I support and help teachers. And she actually thought about the teacher as the customer. And as I spent more time, and my background really is in large community systems, how to reduce poverty, how to end homelessness and that. And so I was asking Carol, are the teachers able to make those kind of decisions independent of the system they're in, independent of the school, independent of the district? And it became very clear that the influencers, the decision makers, went far beyond the teacher's classroom. So our very first SBIR, which is a funding vehicle out of the Department of Education that is really to support scaling, was to very much ask that question. Who is the customer? If we're going to be taking this product out to the marketplace, who is that customer? And this went fairly early in the research, probably about the time that Sarah was talking about in terms of some of the curriculum changes. But we found out that no, the customer was not the individual teacher. The customer really was the system, whether it was the school district, sometimes schools, but more likely the school district. And then the influencers went all the way up to the state level departments of education. So that then influenced how we developed the research product from that far forward. Not only the commercial product, but it changed how Carol thought about the research, thought about how do we engage the administration within a school district? What information does the administration have to be able to know that their teachers are implementing effectively? So that created a whole different kind of research track that we then were feeding information and data to the administration, making their reports that they could feed back either to the state or to the district to solve their needs.
Wow. Sarah, were you involved with this part of the market research, sort of understanding who these different stakeholder groups were and what their perspectives were?
I would say it was happening in parallel, actually. As Jay's kind of referenced to, a lot of the work was being done in collaboration between Jay and Carol, and then carried out in that kind of collaborative way in the lab as well. So definitely became more aware of it as it kind of expanded as well. But in the very, very early stages, I would say I was much more on the traditional research side.
Got it. So let's fast forward to the beginning of the conversations with Scholastic. Can you share sort of how those conversations got started, how that unfolded?
I sure can. And dates back now well over a year from before we actually closed the deal. So that's kind of a sense to give people, a timeline, is that it was a year in the making. And I actually received an email from their senior vice president of curriculum and said, Jay, just checking in. I had the honor of seeing Carol make a presentation when I was at Houghton Mifflin. Her name was Jessica Woolman. When I was at Houghton Mifflin, and I was really impressed with the work that Carol was doing and with the research. And I just wondered, the progress that you've made, and would you be open to you and maybe your team making a presentation to Scholastic about the progress that A2i had been making. And so that was August of 21. At the same time, I was beginning to be approached from multiple different venture capitalists, being approached by other kind of sales organizations that were going into school districts. So this was right as we were coming out of the pandemic. There was just a fever of activity in the education mergers and acquisition market. And so to me, I knew to a certain extent at that point, we were in play. And so I needed then to think about how do we optimize that experience to the benefit of the outcome that we're looking for. And preserving the focus on all children reading at grade level by the end of third grade had forced me in earlier times to make some really critical decisions. For example, we decided fairly early on that we weren't going to be able to fund this with venture dollars because there was a real risk that the venture dollars would really push to sell the assessment or sell other pieces, which would diminish the chance of really getting to the cumulative result of children reading. So instead, I really focused on the U.S. Department of Education as a funding source and had several grants from them that helped me achieve the resources that we need to be able to get a product to the marketplace that still focused myopically, if you will, on how do we get those kids reading at grade level by supporting teachers.
Interesting. Can you say more about what you saw as the risks of venture capital, that you thought they would focus too much on marketing the product in a particular way, or what were your concerns there?
Well, we had a number of historic concerns, and these were concerns that Carol had of seeing so many good educational practices move into publishers and other places and actually not have the promised effect in the marketplace. So there was just that history of that we had seen before. But from a venture capital standpoint, I knew we were developing a suite of services that by the way that we built the software, we had to redevelop all of the software to be able to get it to scale. We were able to sell various elements of that, the recommendations to the teacher in terms of how do you develop their groups, the algorithms that talked about the assessments and what children should be reading. So there's a really exciting set of products that could be cannibalized and sold individually. And our concern was that by selling them individually, you were going to lose sight of the ultimate goal. You were going to just, which was getting those children actually successfully outcome readers at the end of third grade, and just have a set of nice products. And there are a plethora of nice products in the reading space. There is not another vehicle in place to say, this is the way to assure that all children will be reading at grade level. So that was and again, I had numerous conversations with venture capitals. I was an entrepreneur in residence at Arizona State, as well as the University of California, Irvine, working with lots of venture capital, starting up lots of new companies. And I knew how they looked at it. I knew the kind of dollar return that they need to have with that. And I knew that wasn't consistent with trying to get to scale in education. Now, once you get to scale, once you've proven it as a full system, then I think we could bring venture dollars in. So venture dollars were not, just eliminated as a possibility, but they were moved to a different point of our growth.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. So turning then to Scholastic, how did you identify Scholastic as a home that you would feel comfortable with for A2i?
Yeah. And that really, Rebecca, is the way to look at it, is that, had a number of these conversations. And at that point in time, again, we were just coming out of COVID. Schools were just opening up again. And so that really clamped down, our marketing. We needed to be able to be out in schools to continue to fund our growth, to be able to continue to fund the kind of development that we needed to do. And so we had really gotten to a pinch point there. And so many of the conversations that I was following up on were those conversations that already had presence in multiple school districts across the country, presence in multiple different kinds of ways. And so when Scholastic got in touch with us, they probably have the largest presence in school districts, tens of thousands of school districts that they're already working with. But they didn't have a presence in terms of tools and technologies to get children to read. Their real focus was good materials for children to read. And so it was a perfect kind of fit in terms of mission, that you can't have really successful great readers if you can't get them to read successfully by third grade, but when the materials were right. So Scholastic had the materials. We had the kind of tools and traction to help more and more children succeed at reading. And so there was a really nice meeting of the minds. We were all kind of on the same page. I think Sarah can attest to the fact that those very early conversations, we almost felt like they were talking to ourselves, that we really had this kind of simpatico going on, this really sense of energy and this passion about the mission. So I was feeling very comfortable in terms of that could be a place where A2i could thrive. And I now, with Carol passing away, at the beginning of COVID, I was now very much focused also in terms of her legacy, in terms of how to make sure that Carol's work stayed alive, to make sure that her desired impact was going to be fulfilled. And I knew that at the level that we were, attaching, schools as a small business was not going to be able to ramp up to have that kind of impact. So those were the various things I was looking for. How do we have presence in many districts simultaneously with the same kind of contact with influencers that we needed to develop? And Scholastic was a natural, and their rhythm, their energy, the passion of our employees to Scholastic. Plus, I think that big purple dog helped a lot, right, Sarah?
Definitely.
Sarah, is there anything that you would like to add to Jay's description of how this relationship unfolded? And then I'd love to hear what your work life has been like since the transition and how that's changed, if at all.
So yeah, no, I think first I would just say the way Jay described it is absolutely accurate. It kind of started as like a general feeling out, knowledge transfer conversations. And then as we picked up steam, we had more and more focused conversations with some different, more specific groups within Scholastic, so that it felt really natural. It was a great way to really start to understand what they were interested in about A2i and be able to share that information, and definitely with people who were just as passionate about it and got it. And so that was definitely always led to some exciting conversations. And then there's definitely the nostalgia factor and just joy that Scholastic brings anyway. And so that was also really just exciting for us to be part of those conversations. Since the acquisition, definitely some shifts have been made. One of the biggest differences from a startup is that there are different divisions and groups who are much more specialized. So that's probably been the biggest shift for me personally. And I know for a lot of the Learning Ovations team, we were filling multiple roles. We didn't necessarily have, a design team or a internal communications team. So even some of these little day-to-day pieces that may have been a part of my role or my colleagues' roles is now has a whole department. So that has been a shift, but definitely logically makes sense. And is also then allowed us to move a lot faster in some of those areas. So things like branding, and design, obviously, to have a whole department committed to that makes it much easier than me designing a PDF on Google, which is also fine, but different scale. So I'd say things like that are probably kind of the biggest shift overall.
How large was the team when the acquisition was made, and how many of you moved over?
That was a very important part of the original conversation with Scholastic at the acquisition. As I basically said, is that I'm only interested if you're interested in the entire team moving over. And so that was something that I set out as a negotiating point from the very beginning. So we were about 30 people at that point in time. And part of the due diligence process, with Scholastic in the last several months was getting to know each one of those 30 people, that were going to come over to Scholastic. So Scholastic actually brought everybody over when the deal closed. One of the other preconditions that I made was that both my chief financial officer, who wasn't interested in proceeding, I had pulled him out of retirement to work with me. So he wanted to sit under some palm trees at some point in time. And then I also said that I wasn't interested in a long-term position. And the reason for that, Rebecca, was just real experience with having done acquisitions and mergers before, is that you've got to be very careful, at least I felt, that the company that was acquiring A2i had to have a sense of ownership of A2i. And I was very worried that if it was just Jay and his team coming over, we would be lost in one sort of silo or another there at Scholastic, not knowing the history, not knowing all of the different nuances. So I really wanted it very clear to Scholastic is that they were bringing this team over to fit within their team as opposed to kind of keep us isolated. So the way that we organized the sale was not as an earnout, not something that we had to build for them over time, but they were acquiring the team and A2i and the rights to use A2i, as a whole, and they needed to own that success.
One question that I'm curious about is, what you're able to say from Scholastic's point of view. What about Learning Ovations and A2i was appealing to them? And I'm interested in this in part because I think it may speak to a broader trend we've seen, which is that many, if not most, of the IES-funded, Department of Ed funded educational innovations like A2i that have had some success in scaling have been assessment products. And so I'm curious what Scholastic's interest was in A2i specifically, and if that also speaks to some broader trend about assessments as being a very acquirable kind of intellectual property relative to other types of innovations.
I actually think that's what Scholastic's first blip on the radar was about the assessment. Because we were connected by, as I said, Jessica Woolman, Senior Vice President of Curriculum, that they were trying to develop an assessment themselves at that point in time. So I think they were very interested in the assessment aspects of A2i. And that was really where Carol was working when Jessica had seen that presentation multiple years earlier. And so then it became an issue of how do we open that door to Scholastic that A2i is actually a whole system solution and not just an assessment. And I think it's that distinction, Rebecca, that answers your second question. And that is the fact that I think the reason why assessments are the predominant, success story for the Department of Education is because they really are a standalone box that every district is required and mandated to purchase, to have. And as assessments kind of change with the different kinds of nuances that need to be picked up or the different kind of relevant words or whatever it might be, that's another marketplace that's open to those researchers that have developed those psychometrics about those assessment tools. So to have good assessment, you really are required to have very good, deep research in many ways, all from psychometrics all the way to how children behave within the classroom doing that assessment. But it's a standalone, it's kind of like a box. Like in the old days, curriculum was kind of just a standalone, and then you did other pieces of it. What A2i represents is a solution, is how do we bring all of those things together in a systemic way, like the National Reading Panel asked for, that we now know gets to these results. And so I think over the course of the conversations with Scholastic, we moved from them looking at us as an assessment tool with some other stuff to, oh my gosh, this is actually a way to reposition Scholastic in terms of being able to deliver reading outcomes. And they have an assessment vehicle that we can use and utilize for the whole Scholastic curriculum materials that were available. So they saw the larger promise, I think, as our conversations went forward.
That's really helpful. Sarah, anything that you'd want to add to that about what Scholastic was looking for in this acquisition?
Sure. I mean, I think, and kind of to your bigger question too about why assessments have been successful in this area, I think it's also because it's a known need that districts already have, right? And some interventions, they might be solving a problem teachers have, but there's not a line item in the budget for that purchase for a school or a district. And assessments definitely are something like Jay was describing that inherently are coming out of kind of academic research-backed areas if they're going to be normed and validated in that way. But schools also know they need them. And so I think A2i serves that role as well as, well beyond that. And Scholastic saw a way of not just having those good materials, but a way to attach them not just to an assessment, but something that had been proven to improve outcomes. And that was definitely something that they were looking for, is kind of that more rigorous outcomes-based system or solution. But assessment also has a lot of meanings. And I'm definitely still learning that and have learned that. But even, from No Child Left Behind or earlier, schools needed something more than, percent right on a reading list or these, internal measures that might be relevant in their classroom, but weren't predicting student outcomes on a standardized state test anymore. So I think the kind of increased development of that need that also kind of aligned with the A2i trajectory and probably the trajectory of some of those other assessments that have also been successful.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the concerns for research, that projects that originate in research, is how to generate the ongoing resources to invest back in the product and invest back in the product development. And I think especially now with all the attention on how AI can be used to automate certain functions or personalize educational technologies for students, that kind of reinvestment seems like a really important consideration. That's not really a question, but I'll just put it out there in case you have any reflections on how this looks within the relationship with Scholastic.
I'm going to just one little sliver, and then Sarah, I think you have a much better sense from a Scholastic vantage point. But one little sliver that we didn't appreciate in terms of a partnering with researchers and being able to continue on a relationship with researchers is now we have this huge embedded body of data. We now have tracks of kids in multiple school districts, multiple schools in first grade and second grade and third grade having similar assessments and that type of stuff. And that created a huge database of data available to researchers in terms of to perfect and move that forward. So in many ways, by being able to have this huge data warehouse, which is basically the centerpiece of A2i, we're actually now able to reinvest because of what that data is telling us and make that available to partners, make that available to, as we think about new products coming out.
And I think the benefits can really be captured too through, like you were just describing, Jay, like a plethora of digital products that have that usage data, right? And so the more that we can integrate and pull from that, not just traditional assessment data, but yes, how students respond to individual questions or how long they're even logging into specific books or data like that. I think the scope of Scholastic, there's so much potential value there to just see what students are doing and how we can best then kind of predict what that teacher or student would need going forward. So definitely has been on the radar and being discussed. And I think other things, even like that indexing, like we discussed before, if some of these tasks can be automated, even if the need is already known, but now being done more manually. And we did at the beginning stages of the EIR try to get AI to help with the categorization of those activities into like code and meaning focused. And again, it ended up being easier because curriculums are so irregular in how they present information, easier to just do it manually. But at this stage, we're in a much different place. And I think there's a lot of, Scholastic has magazines that are new every week or every month. If we could automate the process, then that expands exponentially the amount of content that could also be recommended in something like A2i.
Yeah. I do think, Rebecca, there's tremendous opportunity going forward with AI. The reason why I make that distinction in terms of going forward is that, as with most AI, as they talk about it in terms of the implication, is that you're only going to get as good result as the quality of information or the quality of question that you put forward. I think that we're able to stand on the shoulders of the work that Carol did in terms of these classroom observations and understand exactly what it is that children need given what they present. Given that, then I think you can use AI to do tremendous amounts of development beyond that. Without that knowledge, without that discrete understanding, I think it would have been very hard for AI to learn that, if you will, without that kind of classroom observation. Because one of the things that we learned with AI when we were using it was that it just consumes a huge amount of data, to learn. And that data wasn't available until Carol did those classroom observations. And now we're able to take it and expand it over hundreds of thousands of students. And that then I think makes the AI opportunity for reading, the AI opportunity for Scholastic that much more profound.
Wow, that's very exciting. I know we're almost out of time. There was one last topic I wanted to touch on before I let you go, which is around the organizational capabilities you needed to build at Learning Ovations to get this project off the ground. I think a lot of research teams start out with education researchers. Maybe they have an interdisciplinary team of some sort, but it seems like there are other skills that are really needed to commercialize and scale a new product. So can you speak a bit to what kinds of skills and expertise you needed to bring together to really help Learning Ovations flourish?
Sure. I think at the top level, and our chief technology officer really called this out very early on, and that is at the university, at the research level, manpower is not in a shortage. You have postdocs that you can throw at everything. So from a researcher vantage point, they really don't focus in terms of the amount of man hours, the amount of support that's required. Whereas once you get out into the marketplace, you don't have those man hours. You have to do it in some other way, or you can't get a price point that could sell within the marketplace. So I think it's that distinction that, first of all, researchers really have to understand that almost all of what they take naturally is available to them in the academy is not available in the marketplace. And so the very first thing that we had to do when we were moving to scale was completely redo all of the data sets within A2i, which had been, first of all, kind of put together with baling wire and duct tape at the beginning, because that was all the funding that was available, but also was anticipated to be a research tool. And you had a lot of postdocs like Sarah and others that could carry that work forward. And so technology was critical. So, coding, rewriting data sets, rewriting that was very critical. Then the next level that we had to do was understand again that DNA of what does the teacher need and how do we support the teachers. But we had to do it from a different point. We had to do it from how do you support teachers from a research question to how do you support teachers in practice in their day-to-day lives. So we really recruited for top shelf, wonderful, what we called literacy outcome specialists. And that was critical. We had to move the research passion into the practice passion about teacher focus, customer use, customer usability. What do those customers need? And so from those two kinds of peaks, then we had to build a business underneath that. So, we had to have marketing, we had to have finance, we had to have, ongoing effort in terms of research to know, are we in fact having the same results that we would expect to have from the research? But the two principal pillars, which were different from research, was the understanding that you don't have the bodies anymore. So you had to do it with really good technology, really high usability, and then with being able to really passionately keep this teacher centered and support that teacher to achieve those outcomes. I think once we had those two things translated into a business sense, then we built a business around that.
These are really helpful insights for an aspiring entrepreneur who's trying to think about what kinds of capabilities they need to assemble or partner with in order to commercialize
Exactly.
something they've developed. This has been wonderful. I think aspiring entrepreneurs will really appreciate hearing your stories and getting a glimpse into what this particular transition pathway of being acquired by a major publisher looks like. Any parting words of wisdom or thoughts you would like to share with other researchers who are trying to follow a similar path?
So I'm going to let you go first because it's also now, where's it going within, Scholastic in that. So I think some words of wisdom there, and then I might have some after that.
Cool. So two things come to mind right off the bat. One, and I did talk about this at the Games Expo as well, is you cannot over clarify or over communicate. Innovation kind of inherently leads to confusion if something's new or different, especially in the education space where everyone also feels kind of inherently familiar with it. It can be easy to have misunderstandings you don't even realize are happening. So I think that would be my first thing is practice your elevator speech, make sure you have an overview of exactly what your innovation or your product or solution is, and make sure that it's not just you who understands it, it's whoever your audience is huge. And the other piece that I think we've kind of alluded to throughout this conversation is that an acquisition might look totally different in a different case. So I think, this is a good example to have some reference points to and to refer back to is just kind of understanding how the situation can look. But I definitely would say there's not just one way. I mean, even in those conversations Jay was talking about, they sounded very different from different investment capital companies or Scholastic or companies that are more technology based or publishers. So I think just being open to if that is the conversations that you're looking to have, don't be worried if they feel very different, because I think that's to be expected.
And just the two things that I'd add to that, Sarah, I think from a researcher vantage point, for looking at this from a researcher, is to really know what it is that you're developing for that particular market. So we've talked about assessments before. Are you developing a specific assessment for that market? What are the assessments that they are using right now? And how is yours like or not like those assessments? So that you're creating a roadmap, if you will, for that research that you're trying to develop. Where is it going to go? Where is it actually going to fit? And then the other side of that equation was once you get into the business of that, the marketing of that, is to really understand that every one of your genius, wonderful first ideas probably won't work. And just to be very much at peace with that, to be very understanding. And I think what kept Sarah and I going, and I think what kept the research going, and then what kept Learning Ovations going, is we always had that true north. We had really compelling research that we knew got children to reading outcomes. And all we had to make sure that we were continuing to do is every time we made a decision to say, does it fit into that mission? Does it crystallize there? And I can't tell you, Rebecca, how few small businesses I talk to that aren't really clear about their mission. And so if you don't have a true north, how do you make sustainable decisions? It's almost impossible. So those were the two recommendations that I'd give.
Thank you. I think those are all four, super helpful. Really, again, appreciate your time and willingness to reconvene, to delve deeper into your story. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Always good to see you.
You as well. Great to see you guys.
Take care, Rebecca.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.